Economist here, trying to prop my phone up so we can actually see the bridge and not be looking at the ground. There we go. All right, I got it. Hey, there's a shot of the bridge for you. Thank you for joining today's live stream. We're going to talk about this jobs report a little bit. This is not a surprise to me. I mean, everybody is kind of under the impression that we are going to be going into a situation in which that the Federal Reserve is going to be lowering interest rates. And it was just like kind of that assumption just from everybody, and including like all these layoffs that you are seeing out there would just kind of give you the idea that there is going to be some really bad job numbers coming out as well. Wasn't the case, right? Jobs number came out way above expectations, a lot more than anybody on the markets or Wall Street was expecting, including myself. I mean, it was like something well over 300,000. And this does not give much incentive for the Federal Reserve to be lowering interest rates, right? Give me guys the thumbs up if the sound is okay. It's a little bit breezy out here right now, and I don't want it to be like so bad that you can hardly hear anything from all the wind noise. So just give me the thumbs up if everything's cool. Otherwise, I'll move back over to the car and then we can do the video from there. But this is something that like I have pretty much been focusing on the entire time. Like, if you want to see the Federal Reserve lower interest rates, then most likely you are going to have to see people losing their jobs and not gaining them back, right? So now, this is what I had predicted before, is that the layoffs that we would see from all these corporations who are going under, it is pretty noisy, isn't it? It's okay, or is it noisy? But all these people getting laid off from these corporations, they're going to go find work back at the service industries, flipping burgers or serving beers or doing whatever it is they're doing. And that's exactly what we're starting to see happening, right? So should I move back over to the car? Cross that bridge many times. Yeah, there's a shot of the bridge. So again, like, what would give the incentive for the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates? There really isn't much. I mean, they got prices coming down to be stable. They got employment is running good, got a tight labor market. There's really nothing out there that I see that would give much incentive for the Federal Reserve to want to lower interest rates. This is their ammunition, and unless there is actually bad times that are hitting the markets or hitting the economy, not even really the markets, just the economy, then that's really where the Federal Reserve is going to start moving, right? That's when they would want to adjust their interest rates to try and bring some of that stimulus in. Noisy, but okay. All right, guys. Well, we'll stick it out here for a little bit then. And so this is, oh, man, a crow just flew right over my head. It was like a foot over. That was crazy. Okay. So again, this is kind of what I'm looking at. It was just like, so what is it that is going to need to take place in order for the Fed to really bring those interest rates down? Is that they would have to really have their average inflation rate meeting that 2% at the inflection point. Now, we have talked about this in previous videos. If you're not a member of the channel, then we actually had done this in a live stream breaking down the average inflation rate in this inflection point as the Federal Reserve is trying to offset all the undershooting of 2% target, the failure to achieve it, by making that up with the over expanded inflation that we have experienced. So basically, when the Federal Reserve has made up for all the past shortfalls within inflation, that's an inflection point, meaning that if they keep the interest rates, like, pretty much, if they keep the if the inflation, good Lord, man, I'm having a hell of a time speaking here. Okay, let's do this again. If the inflation is continuing to run rampant or run excessive when they meet that inflection point, then they will have to have the inflation run under the 2% in order to make up for the overexpanded inflation that we have just experienced. All the inflation that we had experienced just recently was making up for the shortfall that we had experienced over the past 15 to 20 years or so. So really, that's when the Fed is trying to meet that inflection point. And if they do at the same time, when they have the inflation at 2%, they have pretty much broke even at that point. Now, I know that's a little difficult to understand, but really, ultimately, the Fed wants that inflection point where the making up from the past shortfalls is meeting that 2%. At the same time, the inflation rate is 2%, and whatever their Fed funds rate at the time would hopefully be neutral on the economy. That's what the Fed is looking for at that exact moment. So again, that's really difficult to try and time, like how far out into the future that's actually going to be. But that's when the Fed is going to be lowering interest rates, is to try and have it at neutral at the same time the inflection point is taking place, and the inflation here and at the future time, at the present time, would be at 2% as well. Man, that is really difficult to try and explain, isn't it, guys? All right. I don't even know if I got it right. I need to draw it out on a graph. All right. I can hear that crow. Yeah, he's kind of mad. He's sitting right over there in that tree. He's like, what are you doing just talking on your phone? All these people passing by. It's just like, oh, a crazy guy talking on his phone again. All right, haha, no worries. All right, so she knows where you are. All right, Trump said he won't reappoint Jerome Powell. Well, I don't know what difference that would make. Like, I mean, if this is the problem that I see with that exact statement, does Trump actually believe that by getting rid of Jerome Powell, that would make any difference within the FOMC's monetary policy strategy? Because there's 12 voting members and Jerome is one of them, right? Because there's going to be 11 other people who are going to vote on monetary policy besides him. So changing Jerome Powell out or firing him or getting rid of him, is that really going to be making a difference? Because he's pretty much just a spokesperson for the FOMC. Right? I mean, you can't blame the messenger, right? I mean, I guess we can, and then you can get credit for it. Look what I did to the Fed, right? I mean, what is he looking to get credit for that or something? Like, I don't see where that is going to be helpful. Even the statement alone is almost an ignorant one, right? I mean, I don't mean to call you that. I mean, but I'm just saying, if that's what Trump is saying, I'm going to get Jerome Powell, we're going to change things at the Fed. That's an ignorant statement. That doesn't work like that. You have to change all the voting members of the FOMC and the 5 alternate ones, right? I don't think that's going to happen. Right? So the voting members of the FOMC are going to continue on with the monetary policy strategy just the same as it is today. Right? There's going to be no difference in that. All right. I mean, I don't mean to like play down Trump and bash on anything like as far as Trump supporters go or anything like that. I'm just saying that I don't see it. I don't see it coming from that. Like I really don't give a shit what the presidents say. I don't. I haven't listened to those guys in a very long time. All right. Unless they're saying something really silly like, the Fed should be printing money and going into negative interest rates. Then I listen and then I make fun of that. Sorry, guys. I don't. Actually, I'm not sorry. All right. So does the neutral rate raise faster if we raise interest rates? I think the neutral interest rate is more the interest rate that is now within the economy itself. So here's what's funny about like interest rate setting policy is that it's really more like interest rate influencing policy, right? I mean, you think about it right now. What is it that the Federal Reserve is doing to try and bring mortgage rates down? Nothing, right? They haven't done anything to do that, but yet mortgage rates come down on their own, right? Because they're set by free market. And that's what's really interesting to try and put your head around, because everybody is under the assumption that the Federal Reserve is a market manipulator, especially when it comes to mortgage rates and stuff. So, I mean, if that's the belief, is that they're 100% mortgage manipulator or an interest rate manipulator within the mortgage market, it makes it very difficult to understand how it is that the mortgage rates can come down even though the Federal Reserve hasn't moved yet. Right? It makes it difficult to understand that. But if you look at it from a free market perspective, which I know it's not necessarily a free market, I get that part, right? It's all manipulated. But however, when the Federal Reserve is unwinding their balance sheet, allowing mortgage-backed securities to come off the balance sheet, that starts putting mortgage-backed securities into the pool of mortgage-backed securities out there for the investors to buy, right? I'm talking pension funds, retirements, individual investors, all these people who have a desire to have a fixed income return, find stability within the mortgage markets. There are people out there who do buy mortgage-backed securities that are not the Federal Reserve. And this is where a lot of people, I think, just didn't believe it. As the Federal Reserve was unwinding their balance sheet, they thought there was going to be this huge flood of mortgage-backed securities hitting into the market. They were going to cause the price of them to fall and the yields to rise, and mortgages were going to become incredibly unaffordable for people to buy a house with. Although that does seem to be the case for a lot of people out there, it's not like it caused the housing markets to crash, right? It isn't like the mortgage market went up to 15% on a mortgage, on a 30-year mortgage, like a lot of people believe. None of that stuff happened, right? So at some point we have to think, well, what is taking place here is not necessarily what it is that a lot of people are thinking is coming from the Federal Reserve as being the market manipulator. Sometimes free market forces are at play, right? And we do have to understand the free market forces that are at play, or else we're totally going to miss it. Okay? Which a lot of people are doing right now. It's one of the reasons why everybody thought for sure the Federal Reserve was going to be lowering interest rates in March. They didn't take into consideration all the stuff that's coming from the Federal Reserve as far as their monetary policy strategy goes, talking about average inflation rates, wanting inflation to run extra hot, extra long for an extended period of time. They didn't take into any consideration the low neutral interest rate and how that was creating an issue for the Federal Reserve as far as monetary stimulus goes, where they could not lower their interest rates any further. All this stuff is now being fixed. Right? I mean, this is what blows me away, is that the Federal Reserve got everything they needed back. Like, they were on the cusp of like complete failure, right? They were doing stuff like, the jawboning, forward guidance kind of thing, like just putting out the narrative that there is going to be a hyperinflation scenario during quantitative easing 1, 2, 3, and 4, and failed to get the inflation scenario they were looking for. They were running out, right? It's so almost scary to think about how close to the edge of failure they were really becoming, and then the pandemic was able to save them. They had the unusual and exigent circumstances to start providing all the stimulus to backstop every corner of the financial market. It totally worked. It's sad to think, really, but almost kind of like, wow, impressive. Right? They were able to actually pull it off, and nobody really even understands what happened, I try to explain it as best I can. I know a lot of people look at me and they're like, dude, you're just some dude in a car. What do you know? Right? But I pour over these Fed documents. I scrutinize every word within their speeches. I don't let them get away with anything. And I hold them accountable for those words, right? John Williams' speech from 2018, I read that thing just about every single day and go, oh, God, you did it, man. I can't believe it. You pulled it off. And nobody really sees it out there, right? They all think that you screwed up and messed up and, don't know what you're doing. And they're over there just giving each other high fives in the background. It's just like, it's sad to think, but kind of impressive, All right, let's throw you some comments here. Can you guys even hear me? It's like windy as can be out here. All right, the view makes me want to go fishing. Yeah, it does. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? What a great day. It's super calm out there. It's beautiful. There's ducks everywhere. There's a sea lion bobbing his head out there. It's fun. I was only person on the bridge when I crossed it. I turned around so I could cross it 2 more times. It's fun, isn't it? It's 4.5 miles, 4.3 miles, right? From one end to the other. And when you're out there in the middle, it is like, man, the land is a long, long ways away. But yeah, it's fun crossing that bridge. Why is feasible for the U.S. to start building microchip manufacturing plants all over the U.S.? How can this jive with foreign production? It's not going to. It's going to fail. All right. Now, here's the problem with it is that it may not fail, but what's going to end up happening is that after we become a manufacturer of chips, the only way to actually sell those chips is to subsidize it with government, with government subsidies or tariffs on any other microchip that's coming, any kind of chip processors that's coming into the country. You have to hit it with some major tariffs, or you have to subsidize it, because there's no way the United States can compete. They can't. Once these other people out there start making chips, it's going to be like, competing against somebody who's going to make it so much more cheaper than you can, right? And so that's going to be quite unfortunate. And so the only way to deal with that is to subsidize or tariffs, right? It's the only way to really deal with it. And so now you think about it, if there's a subsidy or a tariff taking place in order to keep that manufacturing occurring within the United States, that's going directly against the market forces that are trying to get the manufacturing going to cheaper places. That is like, if people want to talk about the political manipulation, that is it. They're going directly against the free market forces that are happening out there. They're trying to prevent it, and it's not going to work, right? You can't stop it, right? You can ease the pain, right? You can try and alleviate it. You can try and do some governance or something like that, but it's not going to prevent it from taking place. It's still occurring, right? All the tariffs, all the subsidies, all that other stuff, you're like, no, look, we got manufacturing here. And it's like, yeah, but if you didn't do that stuff, it would be gone. Bang, right? And so it's just like, it's not gonna, I mean, it'll work as far as like you'll be able to visually see it happening, but it's not gonna work in the sense that if you didn't have tariffs and subsidies, then it wouldn't work, right? It would go to the cheapest nation out there. All right, I can hear you. We listen to you because you give a viewpoint we don't see elsewhere, and that's exactly why I do this, right? It's why and it's not that I don't appreciate all the hard work that other people are putting into studying macroeconomics and delivering their message, their content out there. I I appreciate every one of those guys, like just as much as like as everybody else does. And I know that their information is valid and good, right? I know it is. I stopped watching it because I needed to make sure that I could get this stuff for myself, that I was understanding this for myself. This is one of the reasons why I do so much reading of the Fed speeches, is because I had to take away all the other noise that I was hearing out there, whether it was valid or not. I just had to remove it all so that I could see this stuff for face value for myself, so I could interpret it myself. And I feel when I started doing that, that I noticed things that were being said out there amongst not only the professional economists and the mainstream media and the narrative, and even guys out there on YouTube, was so different from the things that I was viewing coming from the Fed statements themselves, right? And so when I started seeing this and seeing like other people not talking about some of the things that I was viewing coming from the Fed, I was like, I'm seeing it differently, right? I'm picking it up differently than what other people are seeing out there. And sometimes I wonder if it's just not a feeding of their own information amongst themselves, because I know I was getting a lot of information from everybody, but once I started getting it like going right to the source and reading it for myself, I realized that I saw it much differently. And now maybe it's just because I'm working class or something like that, and I don't see it from the 30,000 feet, being a $1 million investor or something like that. I'm just, I show up every day, 9 to 5 worker, but I work in the supply chain. I sell lumber for a living. I'm part of the distribution network in a major way. And when I saw what people were saying about lumber, and I knew that they were wrong. I mean, I knew, like, without any doubt, that they were wrong. I said, "That's it, man. I'm on my own here. I mean, I can't follow anybody else anymore because I don't know if their information is accurate any longer." It's one of the reasons I ended up here doing what I'm doing. I know it's one of the reasons also that the YouTube channel is not doing as many views, right? Because I'm not out there screaming how the Federal Reserve is going to kill you, right? Like if I had all the information on doomsday scenario and how next month everything is going to come to an end, and I was putting that out there, I would get a lot of views. I know, because I've done fear porn before, right? I mean, it's not hard. I know how to do it. I can make that happen, but that's not where I'm coming from, right? I mean, I'm bringing you the information in a way that is going to be like useful, honest. It's like I'm not trying to sell anything, except for my membership, right? $1 a month to have access to information that I have been digging deep, hardcore research for. The membership, the live streams, it gives you access to not only the community, which is a very close-knit, tight. We are very serious about this topic. You get to ask questions of them. You get to ask questions of me. The live streams are incredibly informative. I can't encourage you enough to become a member and check out these live streams. Like I said, it's $1 a month. It's only $1 to you, but it's everything to me, and I put a lot of work into it, and it gives me motivation to actually, bring even more to you. And this stuff isn't it isn't exciting. It's not it's, to be honest, it's pretty boring, really. Reading over Fed speeches and monetary policy and stuff like that. You have to have a pretty special interest to want to dive into some of this stuff. But once you get going on it, man, does it really you just find it fascinating, right? And it drives you to go deeper, and you almost get excited about it. All right. It's easier to recognize the inconsistencies after reading Fed speeches. Yeah, it really is. Wind's bad now. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Thank you for hanging out. We got 145 people watching right now with 56 likes. We're about 20 minutes into this. We're going to give it about another 10, 15 minutes or so. Is there a way to not give YouTube 30 cents of that dollar and still get access? Um, no, not really. You know, guys, I know, like, I know it's not exactly fun to want to give up some of that money to YouTube or whatever, but it's a pretty cool platform to have, right? It gives me the ability to put out this information, to be able to network and communicate with the group. And, you know, if they have to take a share of that to provide a platform for this to occur on, I'm okay with that, right? Yeah, I mean, I have like a PayPal and stuff like that that you can tip me on. You know, but as far as like trying to provide you with a product that isn't going to cost, you know, $100 or something like that, this is a very cheap product, right? It's $1 a month, and I put a lot of work into it. And so to me, if I could get a channel that was built up of nothing but members, like I had nothing but members for the channel, and that was where the bulk of my content was going to, and I didn't have to worry or even think about ad revenue after that, man, that would put me in such a great spot, I feel, like, for not only being able to provide you with the best information, but then also the motivation for me to be able to sell that product, which is only $1, right? I mean, it's just like like, I don't know how it is that selling something for $1 excites me, but it does, right? And I mean, it motivates me. So I don't know. I mean, if you didn't want to give the 30 cents to YouTube, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess it's like, I guess don't, you know, I don't know how to say it, you know, but until I have another product to sell, this is it. This is the only thing I really have. I mean, that and t-shirts, you know. How do you pay super chats and subscriptions with credit card? I think I mean, it should all just guide you right through it all. Yes, invest in Google and you will get it back. All right. You're doing well, Simon. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Below median single family housing is still very strong with a high demand and no supply after decades of not building any. Commercial and luxury is going to hurt. Yeah, you know, and that's what, like, we were just talking about it. There's an apartment complex just not even, I can almost practically see it from where I'm at right now. And it's like a huge eyesore right here in the middle of Astoria. Probably, I don't even know how many units, 100 units, I guess, maybe. And stalled out. Like, they have not worked on this thing for months and months and months now. They totally ran out of money. And so I'd imagine that, you know, it's going to get sold off to, you know, another investor or something who's probably going to end up finishing it. But man, it has been sitting empty and not having any kind of work done to it for a very long time. And you're starting to see the deterioration taking place. Like, for example, you can tell that they were running out of money when they got towards the roof, because the roof fascia, if you're not familiar with building terms, so like the fascia where the gutter would go, like where the gutters would be hanging from the roof, right behind the gutters, there's a board called the fascia board right there. And now typically these fascia boards are made of a more durable type of material, like it would be cedar or something of that nature that's going to hold up to the weather. On that building, all the trim on the building is all prime trim like you would expect, you know, something that would be, you know, exterior trim. But then the fascia boards are a Standard and Better 2x6. And they are graying out. Like, when I mean graying out, they're starting to discolor because of the weather. And now if you don't protect these things, and I mean like seriously protect them, not just with paint, but like, you know, a good coating of primer and paint, and being like vigilant on the maintenance of it, they are going to rot for sure, especially being right on the river like they are. So I'm kind of questioning some of the building, you know, like the integrity of the building itself now at this point, considering how long it's been sitting, and then some of the practices I've seen that happen to it. All right. And I mean, I can only assume that that would be a similar story to a lot of buildings in the country, right? I mean, not just this one, but like, I'm thinking that would be similar for a lot of people to say. Anything you guys want to talk about or cover? Another view, windy day. It was a lot of fun hanging out with you guys. What do we got here? What idiot would use wood to build apartments? Pacific Northwest? Like all of them? Seriously? Like all of them? Yeah. Yeah, I don't see much, like, especially in my area. I don't see a whole lot. I mean, there are some bigger commercial buildings that are concrete and stuff like that, but for the most part, almost all the building and construction around here is all done in wood. All right, what are your thoughts on the reverse repo lowering? Where is the money going into war? Well, here's something that I found very interesting. Okay, let's think about this whole repo thing for just a minute, because prior to September of 2019, the repo facility wasn't even really used. It was more of like a pressure relief in case the things got like really out of hand and liquidity issues were taken. Then the repo would, like, the repo facility was there as like a pressure relief, right? In case of emergencies, sort of thing. But in September of 2019, there was this huge tax payment that took place, and it pulled a whole bunch of cash out of the big banks, and it sent it over to something called the Treasury General Account, right? And this is an account at the Federal Reserve. Very interesting story still taking place about the Treasury General Account. But back then, all this cash left the big banks and it went over to the Treasury General Account. All right. So at that same time, there was a lot of government spending that was taking place, which left the primary dealers, these big banks, holding a lot of treasuries, right, in their reserves. So they had a lot of treasuries on hand and not a lot of cash. So when that tax payment took the cash away from the big banks and sent it over to the Federal Reserve in that Treasury General Account, all of a sudden the big banks found themselves short of liquidity, right? And now that part right there, whether it was set up or accidental or whatever, I have a hard time believing that it was accidental, just simply because, like, how would you not know that tax payment was going to be taking place? You know what I'm saying? Anyhow, so after September of 2019, there was the repo facility up in operation, and they made it a standing repo facility, and so it made it seem like it's now part of the Federal Reserve's active tools that they've always had, but they hadn't, right? So what was taking place was that we were in what they refer to as a limited reserve system. So at the end of the day, some of these banks the banks would have like excess reserves, or some of them would be in need of reserves. The ones who had excess reserves would lend them to the ones who were in need of reserves. The ones who had excess reserves would lend them to the ones who were in need of reserves, and then the next day they would, so the next day everybody would be balanced out and ready to operate. However, on that particular day, on September of 2019, there wasn't enough reserves. And so those who were in need of reserves were in desperate need of reserves, and the interest rates on overnight lending shot up to like 10%. Right? And the Federal Reserve was like, no way, we can't allow this to happen. That's when the repo facility stepped in. And shortly after that, we moved into what they refer to as an abundant reserve system, where they filled these banks up with all kinds of reserves. They didn't need to be lending to each other on an overnight basis again, or they didn't have that limited reserve to need to borrow from on an overnight basis. Instead, they were now operating over at the repo facility, taking their, whether they were swapping treasuries for cash like the non-QE QE, or they're swapping cash for treasuries like they had done all the way up until just recently here, right? But point being is that we used to operate in what they refer to as a limited reserve system. We could be moving back into a limited reserve system as the liquidity is now starting to dry up, as the Federal Reserve is going through their quantitative tightening. And it very much leads me to also think that if the repo facility shuts down and all of a sudden there's this big liquidity panic, because the repo facility has been shut down and now it's back to this limited reserve system with the banks and this overnight lending rate, I'm not saying that's going to happen, I'm just saying it could. That would be like a liquidity scare, like unlike anybody would be ready for, or at least not quite anticipating, except if you go and you look at that Treasury General Account right now, it is loaded with cash. I mean, it's like just shy of $1 trillion right now, 800 and something billion dollars. This is about as much money as they have ever had in the Treasury General Account. Now, when they did have spikes that were higher than they are now, it was during the pandemic, and they were offering up all these stimulus packages, and so they needed all this money to send out there to support all these households and businesses. But right now, we're not facing like that stimulus pandemic, got to support the households and businesses kind of situation, but yet the Treasury is loaded on cash right now. This leads me to believe that once the liquidity nightmare begins, that the bond market is going to have issues, and that gives the Treasury the ability, the cash on hand right now, the ability to start buying back into their bonds and keeping that market liquid. Right? It's, to me, this is lining up to take place. Right? And I mean, it almost seems obvious to me, but I don't want to say it's obvious because I might be missing something, but it seems kind of obvious that the Treasury is getting ready to deal with the liquidity issue. The Fed has got the bank's position to deal with the liquidity issue. Everybody is under the impression that the Fed is going to go back into like some kind of quantitative easing, but yet they don't look over at the Treasury and look at all this cash that's sitting there for no particular reason other than the idea of doing a bond buyback. Right? Does all that kind of make sense? I don't know. But that's my idea on the repo. I'm a little surprised steel studs aren't used more too. Not sure why. Maybe availability compared to wood. Yeah, I mean, I actually sold some steel studs the other day. We had a bundle of them been here for like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years, and finally somebody came and asked me for some. Very rarely do we get asked for steel studs. The reverse repo money is going back into equity and debt markets. This is a big reason why there's been so much strength in the markets despite massive rate hikes. Steel way more expensive. Too much wind. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Wood smells. Here in Miami, the termites would turn that into dust, overpriced, and real estate money should be no limit, no materials. Now I feel stupid with that comment. Sorry for the smell of that brain. Steel can be welded. Yeah. Alright. Can you talk a bit about the coming liquidity crisis? Okay, I think I just did. What is it and what will it look like for the average consumer? Liquidity crisis for the average person is just going to be an incredibly tight credit, right? That's what it's really going to end up being, is that it's going to have like credit standards are going to be much higher. Like access to credit is going to be very difficult. That's probably like the major thing in a liquidity crisis that the average person is going to see, is that, you know, trying to get a loan is going to be difficult. On the flip side of that, because loans are difficult to get, then businesses also have a hard time operating. Consumers have a hard time, you know, participating within the economy. Then that in turn usually ends up putting pressure on employment, right? So your job maybe end up suffering. You get laid off, you get time, you know, like maybe you get hours cut back or something like that. So liquidity crisis ends up looking very much like a slowdown, because that's essentially what it is a slowdown within the economy itself. You have to think, like, there's plenty of money out there, right? There's an insane amount of money. It's like looking out there at the river and water or something like that, right? There's just loads of it out there. The problem with it is the access to credit, right? The credit rating, right? The interest rate that people pay. That's where the issues really start to come in. And, you know, when you have like easy flowing credit, then everything is just easy. Like, you know, business is easy, you know, everything is just like, you know, everything flows really well. But when the liquidity starts to dry up and people are hoarding onto that stuff and they don't want to participate and they don't want to, like, they're worried about the future and stuff, this is where, you know, it gets very hard for people who are trying to just operate on a day-to-day basis. Like, you know, you don't have investments, you don't have anything, you just, like, you know, you live in day-to-day. The liquidity crisis for you, in a sense, is like, how do I even earn the money, right? It's not like, where is it going? It's just like, you know, I don't even know where to go to find, you know, a job or something like that. And, you know, those are the times, usually like recessionary periods, in which that people who do have money really end up just making out well, because, you know, everything's on sale, right? You know, so if they have cash on hand and people have a lot of debts and no way to pay them, then they'll start selling off their toys, right? And so that's another thing that you end up seeing, is that, you know, people end up selling off a lot of their, you know, things that they bought just recently that was irrational exuberance, you know. Alrighty, guys, let's see. I'm going to give it just a few more minutes, and then I got to head back into work. Alright, I didn't get my welds tested by Galvey Welds. Seemed more porous to me. Alright. You guys are talking about welding. Alright, wind noise getting bad, hard to hear. Yeah, I hear you guys. Alright, I tried to give you guys something a little bit better to look at today, but yeah, I understand the wind noise was a bit much, and guess we'll just go ahead and call it there. I'm going to come back Sunday afternoon for the live stream, for the members only live stream. And I'm not exactly sure what we're going to talk about on that particular day. I'm thinking that we'll probably talk a little bit about the credible threats, that are probably going to be running rampant through the mainstream media as we start to see like whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to be cutting interest rates at the next, not March, but after that. I would assume that you're probably going to hear a lot of noise. And so to understand the credible threats and what those could possibly look like coming into the next few months, I think that's probably going to be pretty important to understand. Alrighty guys, I use lime, plaster over concrete. Real estate boom is coming. Thanks. Alright. I hated drywall over steel with all the panhead screws too. You ever go fishing there? Oh yeah, we always go fishing out here. I haven't been fishing in quite a while though. Alrighty guys, great time. Thank you much for being here. We had 121 people listening to all this wind noise and 71 likes. I appreciate you sticking it out. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.